Halacha in this. Okay, it is being recorded.
Sorry.
It's all good. I am the Yoetzet Halacha of this community, and I am thrilled to answer all your questions in the area of Hilchos Nida and mikvah and fertility and birth control. So I am just going to repost my phone number right now in the chat, as well as the email address, which is asknechama@gmail.com for your community. Please make use of my phone number and my email address. If you have any questions, never hesitate. Or if you know someone who has questions in this area, do not hesitate to give them my phone number, to give them my email address. It could be your friends, it could be your children, I don't care. I'm happy to answer all their questions, and it has been a pleasure. I believe this is the 8th year, is that crazy, of being the Yoetzet Halacha. We are starting the 8th year, and it is an honor and it is a privilege for me. So what I would like to do today, however, is to give a Tanakh shir, and in order to do that, I'm now going to share my screen with you. Give me 1 second. Can you now see my screen? Just, I'm seeing nods. Fantastic. I'm just fixing my screen. Once you push share screen, it messes up the screen in front of me. I want to see your faces, and thank you to those who I can see your face, which is so nice on a Zoom share. It is not something that happens very often that you can actually see some faces. So here is my source sheet. Is it moving? I want to make sure I shared the right thing. It's moving in front of you. Fantastic. Okay, so I decided I wanted to share a share with you today that I've written very recently, based on the fact that I think very, very often we hear shiurim and we have so many discussions about the avot, Avram and Yitzchak and Jakob, and we kind of forget a little bit about the Imahot and about what they went through. So I wanted to pick a certain story about 3 of them, and I really wanted to analyze it in a bunch of different directions based on the fact that I think it's something all of us can relate to. If you take a step back for a moment, I think we all have had that moment in our lives, or many moments in our lives, where we just reach our limit, where we just reach that point that we just can't take it. There is just too much that's going on. There's too much stress. There's too many things that you have to do, and the deadlines are coming. You know, everybody seems to need you all at the same time, like something that's just going on in our lives. And it's just like we reach what I want to call the breaking point. Like we just can't handle it anymore. And in those situations, sometimes we blow up, sometimes we scream at somebody, sometimes we just cry. We just have a really good cry. Sometimes we isolate ourselves, you know, we kind of separate ourselves to give ourselves a moment to figure out what to do in this type of situation. But I think we've all experienced that. It's like you just had enough, like you just can't handle it anymore. And I think it's a bit of an inspiration for us to see that 3 of our Imahot hit that point in their lives and screamed out. They kind of react in a very, very strong way, and they basically have an outburst. And what I would like to do today is try to understand their outburst and what can we learn from their outburst to apply to us when we reach that breaking point in our lives. The 3 stories that I want to deal with today here is in source number 1. It's a story of Sarah, when Sarah reacts and screams at Abraham, but Tomer Sarai al Abraham, Chamasi alecha, I am mad at you. We'll understand the context in a few minutes. And to the extent, Yishpot Hashem beini ubeinecha, Hashem should judge between me and you. Whoa, really harsh words. Rachael also has a moment where she just breaks and she screams out at Jakob. But Tomer al Jakob, Havali banim im ayin meta anochi, give me children or else I am going to die. And Leah also has a moment where she screams out at Rachael, but Tomer la hama'at kach techas ishti, it's not enough you took my husband, v'lakachas gam es judei b'ni, you want to take my son's flowers? I mean, in all of these situations, it's really dramatic, you know? Hashem should judge between me and you. Give me children or else I'll die. It's enough you took my husband. Like, it's very, very dramatic. And it comes from a place of extreme emotion. And when we understand in the context of the story, we actually understand the emotion and we understand the pain that takes them to that point that they scream out in this way. Let's go through these stories quickly together. If you look at source number 2 with me, the story of Sarah. If we go back to Parshas Lech Lecha, we all know these psukim in Parshas Lech Lecha, where Hashem says to Abraham, Lech Lecha. But something that maybe we don't notice as clearly, because we always look at it as Abraham, Avram and family did Lech Lecha, everything is in singular. Hashem says Lech Lecha, go for yourself. And everything that he says to Avram in this statement is in singular to Abraham. Ve'esacha l'goy gadol, I will make you, Avram, into a great nation. Va'avarechecha, and I will bless you. Va'gadla shemecha, and I will make your name great. Everything is in singular. There's no promise to anyone else other than to Abraham. Now, Avram assumes his family is involved in the bracha too, and therefore the next pasuk, Vayikach Avram et Sarai ishto v'et Lot. He takes Sarai, his wife, who he assumes is part of this blessing, and he even takes his nephew Lot, who he assumes is part of this blessing, and then he goes down to fill this mission with them. But as we know, time goes forward. Lot disappears and goes away to the lands of Sodom and doesn't return. So Lot disappears, but Avram still keeps this belief, and so does Sarah, that she is included. That's what she believes. And the years are going on, and the years are going on, and we know here in source 3, where I bolded in Pasuk Gimel, Miketa Sar Shanim L'Shevet Avram Beretz Canaan. It's 10 years already since they got to Canaan. They were married for a while earlier. We don't know how long, but it's 10 years since they entered Eretz Yisrael, where they're hearing all these promises, and she just doesn't have any children. So Sarah's like, what am I going to do? How am I going to help Abraham to get this blessing? And what am I going to do for myself as well? And she does something that's pretty crazy. It's a major sacrifice, but we all know what she does in the beginning of source 3. Hashem's not letting me have children. Be with my maid. What's the point? The point here is Avram should have a child with the maid. And Sarah, you see here, she's holding on. Maybe I will build through her. Hopefully I'll adopt that child. I'll be able to be part. That's the belief that Sarah has. And we all know that that doesn't go her way. Pasuk Daled, Hagar is with Abraham. Hagar gets pregnant, which I'm sure is very, very hurtful to Sarah that happens so quickly. And then once Hagar sees that she's pregnant, now she lowers the status of her mistress. She clearly says to Sarah, this baby isn't yours. You're not having this baby. This is my baby. You're not part of this dream. You're not part of this picture. And all of a sudden, after all this time, Sarah realizes this dream that she's been following blindly, Avram, year after year after year, to be part of Am Yisrael, to be part of this chosen nation he's supposed to make, and she's been kicked out. So of course, she breaks. She gets so upset. She lashes out at Abraham. If I take the story of Rachael, I understand it too. It's such an emotional and such a difficult story, right? Start from the very beginning, source number 4. Rachael meets Jakob at the well. She's so excited. She meets this mystery dream guy at the well. But Taras Vataged Lavia, she's so excited. She runs home. She tells her dad, I found this guy at the well. It's so exciting. She brings him home, and the two of them fall in love. Pasuk Yitcha. Vayahav Yaakov et Rachael. He loves Rachael. He even offers, it's crazy, I will work 7 years for Rachael. Think about it. The years are going on. And Lavan agreed. Yeah, sure, no problem. So now here come the years. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, a very long time. People can't even wait 6 months anymore to get married. 7 years. And during that time, but don't worry, it was so quick in his eyes because he loved her so much. But take her perspective. She's waiting. She's counting. She can't wait. It's so exciting. 7 whole years till she gets to marry him. 7 years go by. Jakob says to Lavan, Hava es ishti. Okay, it's time. Please give me my wife. And we all know what happens in the story. It's a horrible thing. Rachael is so exciting. It's finally the day. And what does she figure out? There's a big party, but yet she's not invited. Right? Lavan takes Leah and marries her off to Jakob. So here she is. She's shattered. Her whole dream, 7 years, she's going to marry this guy. I'm sure he was telling her about this chosen nation he was going to build. She was going to be part. She was going to be the mom. She's so excited. And it all just disappears. But then there's a glimmer of hope. Jakob says, don't worry, I'll work another 7 years to be able to marry you. Rachel's excited. They wait, or they get married, and he works now another 7 years. And then as the years are going by, what is she seeing? Leah has child number 1. Leah has child number 2. Leah has child number 3. Leah has child number 4. And she's like, I have 0. How am I going to be part of this chosen nation? Am I going to be the mother of this chosen nation? I just don't have any children. Leah seems to have all the children. So of course, she broke. She had an emotional break. Source number 5, she screams out, why? Ki lo yalda liYaakov. She didn't have any children, and she was jealous of her sister. So Rachel breaks. We get it. We understand it. It's certainly an emotional, roller coaster that she went on. Let's talk about Leah. Leah, of course, is always compared to her sister. Every pasuk, there's an older daughter, there's a younger daughter. This one, in terms of physicality, source number 6, this one is beautiful. Rachael hayta yifat Torah yifat mareh, and guess what? Beinei Leah rakot. What does that mean? Her eyes were tender? What does that mean? Rasag naot adinot. They were very beautiful. They were very tender. But we all know what that means. If somebody says, "Oh, she's gorgeous," her eyes are pretty, that means she's not very gorgeous. So here we have this knockout sister and this other sister not so pretty. If you look at the Chizkuni, it's not just she wasn't pretty, but rather v'havir kashimula. It was hard for her to be outside. The air affected her eyes. It was very hard on her eyes. It sounds like allergies to me, right? She was sickly. She had to stay indoors. Or Rashi and others who bring out that her eyes were always tender, meaning she was always crying. She always had red all over her eyes, right? Which doesn't bring out the beauty in a person when they're crying all the time. So here we have these two sisters. One is gorgeous, one is not. One has all the potential to get married, to have a great life, and the other one really feels like she's living within the shadow of her sister, and her sister's going to have it all, and she's not going to have anything, and she's also nervous. And then her nightmare comes true because her sister comes home with this great guy, and everyone loves him, and her sister loves him, and he loves her sister, and everything's going well. And of course, as we know, source number 7, Lavan says, Lo yasakeinu komenu lateit sira lefnei bechira. It's just not normal in our society that the younger one gets married before the older one. It's very embarrassing for the older one. Whether he's lying or that is a true rule, it still, I'm sure, is societally true. And therefore, here is Leah, who's dreading the day that her sister is going to marry this guy because it's going to be so embarrassing for her. She has no one to marry, and she's all in this very bad place. And then what happens, and it's very unclear from the psukim, she's either manipulated by her father to marry Jakob or she volunteers. It's a little unclear. But then you have to believe that when she finally marries Jakob, she's hoping Jakob will be happy. Jakob will want to just be married to her. He'll be thrilled. It's okay. He didn't mind the switch. It'll be okay. And he's not. He's not okay. Jakob is not happy. Jakob does not like that he's married to Leah. Think from Leah's perspective. That's so hurtful. That's so difficult for her, to the extent he'll work another 7 years just to have another wife. Ouch. That is so incredibly painful. And the pasuk tells us in pasuk lamed, Vayahav gamet Rachael me Leah. He loved Rachael more than Leah. When he marries Rachael, he prefers Rachael to Leah, and she knows it. Look at the language of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. It's so powerful to me. The word rakot could mean many things. Beautiful, weak, right? That's the description of Leah's eyes. Beautiful, weak, or sensitive. But the word is more significant than that. It means, as Rashi, Radak, and the Midrashic traditions explain, Leah was easily moved to tears. She was emotionally vulnerable, with none of the resilience that might have carried her through her husband's attachment to her younger sister. Thin-skinned, sensitive, easily hurt, she knew she was Yaakov's lesser love, and it caused her pain. And this is entirely clear in the story of Leah. Because if you look at source number 8, after he marries Rachael, by Yar Hashem Kisnua Leah. Hashem saw Leah was hated. And then when she names her children, it's the most painful names, right? Ruvain, Kira Hashem Bani, Kiataya Venrishi. God saw me in my torture. Maybe now my husband will love me. Shimon, Ki Shama Hashem Kisnua Anochi. God has seen that I am hated. Ouch. Levi, Tahapam Yovet Ishi Alai Ki Alai Lo Shlosha Banim. Maybe now he'll help me. Maybe now he'll give me attention. I got these 3 kids. He's got to help me, right? I need some help. It's hopeful, but it's not really. And then when she finally has the 4th, Yehuda, which sounds happy, Hapam Odet Hashem, most of the Mefarshim bring down that she's not happy because Yaakov is all of a sudden loving her, but she's happy because she's like, I have enough. Like, I have my amount of kids, God. Like, things are okay. If you look at Ibn Ezra, she's saying to Hashem, thank you. And basically, no thanks for more. Ki lo achmod liot leo. Please, I don't want any more. I can't handle any more. Speakly, it's enough. Meaning, what is she seeming to claim? It's not working. Yaakov's not coming to me. And I can't do this all on my own. So please, it's enough. It's enough, children. Please stop. So here we have Leah, who's in this really bad place. Her husband doesn't seem to like her very much. She's having all these children and no one to support her. And she just doesn't feel any love. Comes her son and gives her some flowers. Token of love. And Rachael comes over and says, can I have some? And Leah just loses it. You have all the love of my husband. Now you want my flowers? She just breaks. She breaks in such an emotional way. So I certainly understand. I understand all 3 of these stories. I understand why they break. I understand their emotion. certainly through the psukim, it's very clear to understand why this happens. But I feel like there has to be more. It has to be more than I'm meant to learn, other than humanity. People sometimes lose it when they've had enough. There has to be more to the story. So I kind of want to go in a different direction and ask the following question. Every time that somebody lashes out, right, kind of screams at someone, there's two different ways to understand the screaming. One possibility is they're just screaming and they don't really mean to scream at that person. And what they're saying actually doesn't mean anything. They're screaming. The second way is that they really have something that they're screaming about. So let's understand these two perspectives. I could understand that in these three cases, they're not actually screaming at the other person because what they say doesn't make any sense. Let me explain what I mean. Sarah yells at Abraham about the situation with Hagar. But take a step back. It was Sarah's idea for Avram to marry Hagar. And it was Sarah's idea that Avram should have a baby with Hagar. So what are you screaming at Avram for, right? He didn't do anything. If you look at the story of Rachael, she's yelling at Jakob, give me children. Well, he didn't do anything. That's not his fault, right? He's not doing anything to cause her to not have children. So she's not really yelling at Jakob in a real way. And when Leah yells at Rachael, you took my husband, now you want my flowers. That makes no sense at all, because the reality is Leah took Rachel's husband, right? He was supposed to marry Rachael. Rachael stole him first. So what do you mean, Leah, to say to Rachael, you stole my husband? So one possibility is they are lashing out. They are lashing out in a kind of irrational way because they've hit this breaking point. And you might therefore see this story in a more negative way towards these characters. If that's true, I'm going to come back to that version in a few minutes. I want to look at it the second way first, which is they lashed out and they actually had something that was real that they were blaming the other person for. They actually weren't lashing out in an irrational way. They were being rational. They were actually standing up for themselves. So you're doing something wrong and I'm pointing out to you, I'm standing up for myself to say you did something wrong. You wronged me. So what could it possibly be that they are blaming the other person for? So let's take each one. When it comes to Sarah, what is it possible she's yelling at Avram about? If you look at source number 9, there are many Mefarshim who tried to come to defend Sarah and say, absolutely, Sarah had a real issue with Abraham and she had the right to scream at him. And therefore, if you look at Rashi says as follows. Again, I read where I bold, so it's easier to follow me. Source number 9. She's saying to him, Kishet palalta la kadosh baruch hu, mati tein li vanochi holech ariri. In Parak Tavav, right before the bris bein besarim, Abraham davens for himself. And these are his words. God, what are you giving me? I have no children, right? And that's when God promises and says, you will have a child, and gives him the entire covenant, the brit bein besarim. Well, says Sarah, that's very nice that you said that to God. Lo hitpalata ela alecha. Hello, you said, I don't have any children. You daven for yourself. Well, hello, why didn't you daven for me? V'hayalecha litpalel al shanenu. You should daven for both of us. V'yiti nifkedet imcha. And maybe had you davened for both of us, Hashem would have given both of us a child. You only davened for yourself. How dare you only daven for yourself? You see a similar idea that you find in other Mefarshim, as we'll see, by the other Imahos as well. And we'll come back to that. But one idea here in Rashi is she's blaming him. Why did you daven for me? A second idea that's found in Mefarshim here in Radak in source number 10 is that she's not blaming him for the davening aspect, but she's blaming him for the atmosphere within the home. And the way that Hagar is treating Sarah might really be Abraham's fault. If you look at Radak says as follows, you know what? When I said you could marry Hagar and you can have a baby with Hagar, I had full intention to do what was good for you. I was thinking of you the whole time. And that's why that's why I gave her to you, so you could have a child. However, you didn't do the same back. She's not treating me right? She's telling me that this baby isn't mine. She's not treating me the way she's supposed to. And you're not saying anything. You're not sticking up for me. I put everything for you. I sacrificed everything for you. You're not doing anything for me. And because she's your wife, for your honor, I'm not saying anything to her either. So I'm in this really hard place. I want to be respectful of you and your relationship with Hagar, so I'm not saying anything. You really should say something, and you're not saying anything. If you look at the Cheskuni, he says it great. I was so careful, right, to worry about your honor, but you're not worrying about my honor. So the question is, what are we saying? What should Avram have done? And Sforno, I think, spells it out better. Why don't you yell at Hagar? Why don't you say, Hagar, you can't treat Sarah that way? Hagar, you can't act that way. Why didn't you stand up for me? Or if you look at source 11, Rav Hirsch, it's an interesting little bit of a twist where she says, well, Rav Hirsch says, Hagar knows that it was my idea for you to marry her. So she knows that this was all because of me. And therefore, if she's treating me badly, look where I bolded. So it must be in your behavior and conduct that I've lost value in her eyes. How are you talking about me around her? It must be that she feels she could treat me this way. She must be getting it from you, Abraham. And therefore, I have a real issue with you, Abraham, right? Sarah wasn't just yelling irrationally. She was really blaming Abraham for something very, very real. And the proof of this being possibly what is going on here is that Abraham reacts by saying, you're right. If you look at source number 12, Avram's reaction is, okay, you're right. You take your maid. She's your maid again. Do what you want to do to her. And if you look at Radak there, that's exactly how Radak plays it out. Yeah, she's still going to lie with me. She's still my wife. But you know what? She's your maid again. You're right. We should treat her differently. And look at the end. You're right, Sarah. I didn't stand up for you. So now I am. Now I'm giving you permission to act the way you need to act. So if you look at the way the Mefarshim are looking at it, clearly they're defending Sarah. Sarah had something real that she was blaming Abraham for. If I look at the story of Rachael, I can do the same thing with Rachael. When she yells at Jakob and she says, Jakob, Havali banim, right? Let's defend Rachael. So here we go. Source 13, similar, Rashi again. Havali, what is she saying? Sorry, right? Didn't your father do this for your mother? Right? Look at the story of Yitzchak and Rivka. He davened for Rivka. That's why they both had a child together, right? He didn't marry somebody else. Why aren't you davening for me? Rasag says, clearer. Hitzpalel sheyuli banim. Come on, Yaakov. I know you're having children with Leah. I know, so you're good. You have children. Why don't you daven for me? And Rachael is yelling at Yaakov, just similar to the way that Rashi looks at the facts that that Sarah is yelling at Abraham. Why didn't you daven for me? It's not just about you. It's also about me. But I think we could take it a step further here in source 14, because Rambam says it's not just about you should have davened for me. No, you should have gone way further, is what Rachael is saying to Yaakov. The chashva ki b'ahava ta'ota, you love me so much. You tell me you love me so much. You should do more. Yitaneh Yaakov. You should be fasting, Yaakov. The Elvasak, the Afer, you should be mourning. You should be sad, Yaakov. You shouldn't be okay. You should really be praying to God in such a fervent way that to make sure I should be able to have children. But the most interesting mafarish that I found here, which really kind of threw me when I found it, I couldn't believe it, is the Ralbag in source 15. And the Ralbag says, no, it's not just Rachael is saying daven for me or be sad for me, daven harder for me. No, she's really blaming Yaakov. Look at Ralbag. This is what I think, says Ralbag. The reason why I don't have children, I think it's on you, Yaakov. I think it's because you don't want to have children with me. I think that when we're having relations, you must be doing something that's causing that I can't have children. You are actually on purpose not having children with me. And when you take a step back from this Ralbag, it's kind of shocking that she's really accusing Yaakov of doing something like that, but it actually does make a lot of sense in context. If you look at source 16, we happen to know from an earlier story in Breshit, the story of Lemach, that there was a practice during that time, during the earlier times, and probably through the time of the Avos as well, where you have a man who marries two wives, as we have in this story. Lemach has shtei nashim, he has two wives. One's name was Ada, one's name was Sila. This is one of the descendants of Cain. And when the pasuk tells us about Sila having a child, there's kind of like a gamhi, she also had a child. Comes Chazal to tell us the story behind this story, which is that there was a practice at that time. I'm going to read it inside here, source 17. This is the normal thing. We take two wives, and on purpose, one would be the wife for having children, and one would be the wife that you didn't want to have children, and you would just have her for the relationship aspect of marriage. If you look at the Chatav Kabbalah, he says it in a way that really makes you think, oh, this could be Yaakov with Rachel and Leah. Klomar zu hi leharayon levad, one wife is just to have children. And look how he describes that wife. She'ein lebala ima shum kervat hadas v'chavivos. There's not really a love between the husband and the wife, right? He doesn't really love her so much. He's not really hanging out with her so much. Doesn't that sound like the relationship of Jakob and Leah? And then we have the other one, the other one who's taken for relations. She's always hanging out with her husband, right? She's always so pretty and dressed up for him and hanging out with him. She's the one that he really loves. So in this understanding that Rachael is having here, oh my gosh, maybe Yaakov really on purpose is having two wives and Leah's having all the children and I'm not, and it's on purpose. Yaakov is actually not having children with me on purpose because he wants to keep me as that second wife who he loves and hangs out with all the time and doesn't get distracted by having children. So possibly, again, we can argue Rachael had a real taina, a real issue against Yaakov. I could do the same thing for Leah. When Leah yells at Rachael, right, it's enough, you've taken my husband. It sounds ridiculous that she would say that, but some of the Mefarshim really do defend her. The first one I think is a little bit fascinating, and again, some of you may say far-fetched, but if you look at the Sfarno Cheskuni in source 18, they actually think that Leah was saying, Rachael, after I married Yaakov, you should have backed down. You should have left. You should have married somebody else. You're gorgeous. You had potential to marry anyone. I'm married to him. Why did you marry him second? Why did you leave him alone? Look at Cheskuni. Share anochi naseti lo tchila. I married him first. First come, first serve. You should have backed away. Or Sfarno. Shelo haya lach. You should not have agreed to be the second wife. You shouldn't have. And now here you're going and asking for my flowers, which we think adds to the libido. And now he's going to hate me more and love you more. How dare you? Why didn't you back away? Why did you have to marry him? It's a little bit wow to think that Leah would say that. But there is a second interpretation of also what Leah could be saying, which isn't that you shouldn't have married him. Of course you should have. He wanted to marry you first, but you should share him. You don't share him. That's what Leah is accusing Rachael of doing. If you look at the Mefarshim, it's actually really very fascinating how they discuss how Yaakov split his time. You could argue Yaakov was equally with each wife, but most Mefarshim think absolutely not. From the Psukim, that actually doesn't make any sense. If you look at Mefarshim here, Radak in source 19, Haya Yaakov shachevim Rachel yoter mesher shachevim Leah. He slept with Rachel way more than he slept with Leah, or even more so, the Rambam, Yaakov Rachel. His permanent location where he slept was the tent of Rachael. He was with Rachael all the time. To the extent that in source 20, when we have this entire discussion of Lavan and he's searching all the tents, and there's a discussion of him going into the tent of Yaakov, the tent of Leah, the tent of Rachael, yet Rashi even points out, Oel Yaakov, who Oel Rachel? They're the same tent. Rachael and Yaakov had the same tent. That was his permanent residence. Yaakov Tadir Etzla. He was always with Rachael. And therefore I could understand Leah, who basically says, okay, we're both married to the same guy. We're sisters here. Share. Please, can you share our husband? Why is it that he's always with you and he's never with me? So I think there is a way to look at all three of these stories as they have a genuine complaint. They have a real issue. They are standing up for themselves. And therefore it comes to a point they can't take it anymore. And they voice their opinion and they voice for themselves, an objection to the actions of the other person. In that sense, it would be a story of strength. It really would be something that we could look at in a very good way. But I want to go back again to the first way that we were looking at it, which had a little bit more of a negative tint, where they're kind of lashing out. And in lashing out in each of these stories, there actually seems to be this question mark of who is the victim of the story. And let me explain to you what I mean. If you go back to here to source 21, the story of Sarah, she lashes out at Abraham, that's true. But Abraham doesn't seem to react. He actually reacts in a positive way. But immediately afterwards, she lashes out at Hagar. She tortures Hagar and Hagar runs away. And you're kind of unclear. Who's the victim? Is Sarah the victim or is Hagar the victim? You kind of aren't sure. And in the story where Rachael lashes out at Jakob, Jakob reacts not so nicely. By Echarav Jakob Rachael, he gets pretty mad. So you're kind of unclear. And he says to her something that makes sense. Is it my fault you don't have children? So then again, who's the victim? Is Jakob right? Is Rachael right? You're kind of confused. And then in the Leah story, you're also confused because Rachael then says, fine, I'll trade it a night with Jakob for the flowers. And you're kind of confused because that doesn't sound like Leah and Rachael made a fair trade. So you're also very confused. Who's the victim in this story? Let me now go through this in a much bigger way. If we go to the discussion of who's the victim, Sarah versus Hagar, this becomes very, very complicated. Because if you look at the language, Vata'aneha Sarah, that is very, very strong language. In source 22, as the story goes on, the language of inui, of being tortured, happens a few more times within the psukim. First of all, when the Malach comes to Hagar and says, what's going on? Her answer is, I'm running away from Sarah. Sarah is clearly the person who has caused Hagar to run away. And then the language is used again and again. Hitani tachas yadeha, go back and be tortured by her. And again, kishama Hashem et anyech, name your child Yishma, God has heard your torture. And this language of Inoi should strike a chord with us, because in source 23, Bris Bein Basarim, when it talks about the Jewish people in Mitzrayim, that's the language that is used. We're going to be strangers in a strange land. They're going to work us very hard. V'inuyotam, they're going to torture us. And of course, we don't look at Mitzrayim in a very positive way for what they've done. And if you look at the psukim in Devarim, that language is used over and over again. These are psukim that we quote in the Haggadah on Pesach. Vayanunu, vayitnu aleinu avodah kasha. They tortured us. They worked us hard. We screamed to Hashem, and Hashem saw et anyenu, et amalenu, et lachatzenu, the torture. Very much reminding us of Hashem seeing the torture of Yishmael. And therefore you have the torture of Hagar, which is the name of Yishmael. We have a very hard time with how do I understand how Sarah can do something like that. And if you look closely at some of the Mefarshim, they are very strong against Sarah. They critique her very strongly. If you look at source 24, Radak and Rambam really have an issue with Sarah. If you look at Radak, Asta ima yoter midai v'avda v'farach. He uses the language farach, which is the language of the Jewish people in Mitzrayim again. She worked her too hard. She gave her really, really hard work. Oh, it hurts me to read these words. Maybe she hit her. Maybe she cursed her. She just couldn't handle Hagar, so she ran away. Says Radak, Lo nahaga Sarah bezeh. She didn't do the right thing, Sarah, in the story. Sarah is not the victim of the story. Hagar is the victim of the story. If you look at the Ramban, it's even harsher. Sarah sinned with this torture, not only Sarah, but Abraham for allowing her to do it. And because of that, that's why Yishmael hurts us in the future. That's what the Ramban says. Very, very harsh against Sarah. And therefore, when we have the story of lashing out, one way to look at it is this is a very low moment for Sarah, a point in her life where she really hits bottom, lashes out, and does something that really is not okay. She does something that is looked at in a very negative way. However, there are other Mefarshim who really are struggling with this interpretation. And I think a lot of it is based on a hashkafic point, which is a strong one, which is this is Sarah Imenu. This is Sarah Imenu, who's married to Abraham, who's known as a couple for chesed, who's known for hachnasas orchim and inviting in guests. It is just so hard to take someone like Sarah and say that she would do something like this. And therefore, we look at it in a slightly different way. It happens to be, if you look at source 25 with me, the language of inui, of torture, is used in other places, and it doesn't mean physical torture. It really doesn't. Back to source 25, when Leah calls Ruvain, as I read this too a few minutes ago, Hashem saw me in my torture. Now, nobody thinks that Jakob was torturing Leah. Nobody thinks he was hurting her, making her work hard, beating her. Nobody says that about Jakob, right? So what does it mean? It was torture to her. It was emotional torture, what she was going through. He didn't love her. He didn't pay attention to her. There was a torture that was involved to her. It wasn't something physical. It was something she was feeling on the inside. You see that also within the language of Lavan. When Lavan is running after Jakob at the end of the story, and he finally catches up and he says goodbye, the last thing he says to Jakob is, Im tanet b'notai, don't torture my daughters. And what does he mean? He says, don't take more wives. Again, he's not saying don't hit my daughters. He didn't think Jakob was going to do that. He just means more of an emotional turmoil for them. Taking more wives, you're going to give them less attention. So maybe I could understand it in a little bit of a different way. It wasn't real torture. It was something that Hagar was feeling. It was something that Hagar felt inside. Well, why would Hagar feel something like that inside? And we have to take a step back to understand that it always takes two to tango, and Hagar did do something first. So let's look at that first. If you look at source 26, before Sarah's reaction, before Sarah seems to have this break, we used this pasuk before, but now let's analyze it a little better. She lowered her mistress's status in her eyes. And if you look at the Mefarshim, there are two very different ways to understand what Hagar did. One possibility is that Hagar said, I am, your maid and you are my mistress. But when I married Abraham, right, I actually became equal to you. And therefore, now you're asking me to do your laundry and to cook you dinner. And I don't have to do that anymore, right? I've lowered, I'm down here. I lowered you down to my level. And therefore, I don't have to listen to you anymore. And that's what Hagar did to Sarah. If you look at Radak, since now I'm having a child with Abraham, now I'm a mistress too. I don't have to listen to you anymore. And therefore, what's possible that Sarah is therefore doing is saying to her, no, right? Avram says she's your maid again. So Sarah is saying, we're not equal. You are my maid. You need to work. You need to do all the things I said. That's not torture. But if somebody has tasted freedom, being told now that they have to work again, that can feel like torture. If you look at Rav Hirsch, he brings this explanation, source 27, meaning Sarah didn't do anything physical, but by words had made her feel her dependent position, made her feel Hagar suffering with something mental in her feelings. I am the maid again? I don't want to be the maid again. I was out of that status. Don't make me do that again. However, there is a second explanation for what Hagar did. And it's not that now Hagar feels that they're equal, but Hagar said, I was the maid, but now I have the baby. So I'm not your equal. I'm above you. I've lowered you down to beneath me. And therefore, if that's true, Hagar was treating Sarah as beneath her. If you look at a lot of the Mefarshim, source 28, it's hard to read, but that's the way they are explaining it. The zilzul kabogvir, she was making fun of Sarah. It's not just, I don't want to work for you anymore. It's, I'm going to make fun of you. I'm going to degrade you, right? Because now I'm having the baby and you're not, and I can make fun of you and I can treat you in a terrible way. If you look at Rashi, it's one of the hardest Rashis for me to read, but because especially as my job as Yoetzet, I feel like it's the most insensitive thing you could do to somebody who's struggling to have children. But I'll read it inside so you could feel what Sarah was going through. Hagar used to say, says Rashi, Amra, Sarai zu ein sitra kegluya. Do you know that, Sarah? She's not the same on the, inside as she is on the outside. Like, you don't know the real Sarah. Maretz, makilu itzadekas venesadekas. She makes you think that she's such a great person, but she's not such a great person. How do I know? All these years she couldn't get pregnant. I got pregnant right away. Oh, how horrible, how insensitive, how disgusting to say that, to go around saying that to everyone about Sarah. And all of a sudden, if you understand that that's how Hagar was treating Sarah, A, you understand why Sarah breaks, but two, you understand that Sarah had to counter that. And to counter that, she had to make sure that Hagar understood, you can't treat me this way. And if you look at those Mefarshim, source 29, what did Sarah do? You have to remember, you're beneath me, Hagar. I'm not beneath you. Lo tiv don't you dare make fun of me. Don't you make fun of me. She was standing up for herself in a very strong way. I found this interpretation very interesting. In source number 30, it's a perush on Rashi, where we have the perush of Ravadim Bar Tanura, who, if you look where I bolded, we're all struggling with this. How could Sarah, so righteous, do this thing? No. We're misunderstanding. Hagar was torturing her. Hagar was making fun of her. That's what it means. Whatever she was doing to kind of bring herself back out of this and defend herself, she was allowed to do. She was really just defending herself. So when we end this discussion, we're confused. I don't know. Who am I feeling bad for? Am I feeling bad for Hagar? Am I feeling bad for Sarah? I'm not really sure by the time I end the story. The same confusion occurs when we get to the story of Rachael and Jakob, because Rachael lashes out at Jakob. She screams at Jakob, give me children. And Jacob's like, what do you want from me? I can't give you children. I don't have that ability. And you kind of don't know which is the one that's the one I'm supposed to feel bad for in the story. On the one hand, source 31, if I look at the language of Rachael, right, give me children or else I'm going to die. To some extent, that reminds me of two other characters who kind of scream out, just kill me, like in that same type of way. They don't mean it, but they're in such a low place. The first one is Moshe Rabbeinu himself. And when he's complaining to Hashem, Lo uchal anochi levadi, I can't do this by myself. I'm so alone. I can't leave these people by myself. So please, Hashem, hargeni naharo. And what did he need? He needed help. He needs support. That's when he gets 70 people to come and help him, right? Eliyahu Navi screams out to Hashem, I'm zealous for you. Why is he so upset? Ve'ivater ani levadi. I'm alone. I'm the only one who's serving you, Hashem. Everyone else is serving Avodah Zarah. And therefore, Vayivakshu es nafshi lekachta. Kill me, because I'm so alone. I need other people to be like me. And it's very possible to understand Rachael in this way and really sympathize with her. She wasn't saying, give me children. She was saying, I'm alone. Go through this pain with me. Be a support for me. If you look at this incredible book called The Rav is Thinking Out Loud, which is actually a book of Rav Soloveitchik talking, and it's recorded, and then it's put together by Rabbi David Holzer. I'm going to read where I bolded for time purposes, but it's just so beautiful. Simply when you reach an impasse, a point of exhaustion and distress, you simply are in despair. You feel that a night of loneliness is converging upon you, is little by little, gradually enveloping you. So you explode, you break out. It's like a shriek in the night. That's how he describes this reaction of Rachael. And when I think about the story of Rachael and Jakob, there's such an incredible parallel story, which I made you a very nice chart here in source 32. We have the story of Shmuel Hanavi's parents, right? And Shmuel Hanavi's parents, it's Elkanah and Hannah, but as we know, their stories are very similar to that of Rachael and Jakob. And where do we see that? So first of all, we have a husband, so Jakob and Elkanah, who marry two women, right? So Jakob originally is just married to Rachael and Leah, and they are described as these two daughters, right? Rachael and Leah in the Pasuk. Elkanah is married to two women, Hannah and Penina, and again, the language is very similar. Shtei Nashim, Shem Achat this one, Shem Achat this one, just like Shtei Banot, this one's name is this one's name is this. The language is very parallel. Of course, in both stories, we have one wife who has children and one wife that doesn't. So in the Hannah story, Hannah does not have children, and Penina, the other wife, has all the children. Then, of course, in both stories, we have that the husband loves the one that doesn't have children more. And it's very clear within the stories. We know that of Jakob with Rachael. And in the story of Hannah, it's very clear. He gives Hannah more because he loves Hannah. Elkanah loves Hannah. However, it's not enough for either wife, right? Just being the wife without any children is not enough. So the barren wife, right, Rachael and Hannah in both stories scream out or react in a very strong way. Rachael says, kill me, right? And we see a similar reaction of Hannah, but tivcha v'lo ta'achal. She just starts crying. She refuses to eat, right? She just breaks. She also has enough. And in both stories, the husbands respond. And the husband's response, you could look at in the way that I'm presenting right now, is kind of insensitive. Yaakov says, what do you want from me? And Elkanah's reaction is, am I not good enough? Am I not better than 10 sons? And the obvious, response that Hannah doesn't give him, just kind of walks away, is no, you're not, right? And in both these stories, you feel the pain of the husband and the confusion of the husband of how am I supposed to help you, right? Am I not enough? But you also really understand the wife saying, that's not the reaction I was looking for. So if I compare her to Rachael and to the Moshe story and the Eliyahu story, I really understand Rachael. But if I take a second parallel, I start to actually see from a different perspective, from Yaakov's perspective. There's another incredible parallel of the story of Rachael and Jakob to the story of David and one of his wives, which is Michal. In both of their stories, I'll go through all the parallels together with you. But in both the stories, the man ends up marrying the wrong sister. It's actually really interesting. So we all know the Rachael and Jakob story. But in the story of David is told that if he kills Goliath the giant, he will marry Meirav, the older daughter daughter of Shaul. And then Shaul gets upset because David, people like David better than him. So he marries Meirav up to someone else. And David actually ends up marrying Michal. So he ends up marrying the daughter that he's not supposed to marry. Both stories have this similarity of the two men impressing everyone and marrying the girl after this crazy action that they do. Jakob, who lifts the stone off the well that nobody else can lift. And of course, David killing Goliath the giant. Both of them in their stories have to escape from their father-in-law at the end of the story. As we know, Jakob runs away from Lavan and Rachael gives him permission to go. And David has to escape from Shaul, who's trying to kill him, his father-in-law, and Michal lets him out the window and allows him to escape. In both stories as well, and a fascinating parallel between Rachael and Michal, is they're the two stories that involve trafim, these weird trafim that we don't really understand. Rachael steals, and there's a share for another time if you want, Rachael steals Lavan's trafim, and we don't understand what they are or why she's stealing them, but she certainly lies and says that she doesn't really have them. No one knows she has them. She sits on them while he's searching her tent. And Michal has these trafim as well, which she puts in the bed to pretend is David. When Shaul is coming to kind of get David, she pretends that David is sick in bed, and she hides these trafim in the bed so that they think that it's David. So she ends up lying to her father in order to save David. And then at the end, she lies again by saying, oh, David threatened her, and that's why she did what she did. They both have these interesting lying to their father stories pertaining to trafim. But the story that I really want to parallel is the two stories where the women kind of break and they scream out at their husband. And we have a similar story of Michal when David is dancing, when the Aron is coming back into Ir David finally, and it's a very exciting event. And Michal comes out and she yells at David, oh, what honor, in a very sarcastic way. And the reaction of David is very, very harsh, just like the reaction of Jakob. And in this story, for sure, in the David story, reacting to Michal, David is very correct. Michal was wrong to scream at him, especially in such a public way. And interestingly, the end of the story is Michal seems to have fertility issues, paralleling that of Rachael. Lo hayala yelet, she doesn't have any children, or she doesn't have children from that point on. And therefore, when you kind of leave these stories, you're a little bit confused who's the victim and who's not. And I can actually defend Yaakov's side. Because if you look at some of the Mefarshim, they take Yaakov's side. If you look at source 35, Radak, it's beautiful the way he plays out Yaakov's answer. It's not I'm being insensitive and I'm yelling at you. He's saying something really real. Humanami mecha velo ani, right? You're the one not having children. It's not me. But look where I underline. I'm doing everything I could possibly do. What want from me, Rachael? I'm sorry, I sleep with you, right? We have sex. Like, what else am I supposed to do? That's my part. Like, what else do you want me to do? He's frustrated. He doesn't understand what she wants from him. Source 35, Rabbeinu B'chai, say outside, he's like, I don't have the ability to make a miracle, to give you a child. That's just not a human being's ability to do. But the Rambam, I think, is even stronger, because source 36 take you back to the Rambam I read you before. If she's literally accusing him of sleeping with her in a way to avoid having children, that for sure gets him mad, because he's like, I'm not doing that. How could you accuse me of doing something that's considered something that would be a sin, something that would be negative? He gets so mad. You think I would on purpose be having relations with you in a way that wastes my semen, that I wouldn't get you pregnant? How could you accuse me of that? So again, when I leave the story, I'm confused. Who am I supposed to feel bad for, Rachael or Jakob? I get to the story of Leah, I'm also kind of confused, because it's such a strange story. Oh, you want my flowers? You have my husband? Okay, have a night with Jakob. It's such a strange story. But if you look at most of the Mefarshim, I gave you an example here in Shadal, that's really what they think the story is. Yaakov Rachel. Rachel kind of had Yaakov all to herself. It was her to say, you can have Yaakov or you can't have Yaakov. She owned him in that sense. She was the wife that he listened to, and therefore in this story, she literally natsna Yaakov Leah. She is giving Yaakov over to Leah. It's such a strange story. But within the story, you then type to question, right? So on the one hand, you feel bad for Leah. She never gets Yaakov. Rachel doesn't share. But on the other hand, she gives her flowers for a night with Yaakov. It reminds you for a second of Yaakov and Esav, who do a trade, right? Soup for the older son status. And when you leave that one, you don't know how to feel because Esav really got the raw end of that deal, a little bit of soup, and he lost the Bechor. Here also, you're like, Rachael kind of lost out. So Leah kind of manipulated her into giving her something that's way more precious than a bunch of flowers. But it's interesting because the Mefarshim jump on Rachael, source 38. We yell at Rachael, how dare you kind of give over your husband? Like, that's such a disgusting thing to do. Okay, you can have my husband. So you leave there also. You're just so incredibly confused. And therefore, when you leave these stories, you see complexity, you see confusion. You're not sure what you're supposed to take away. Am I supposed to look at these stories as a low moment of the Imahot? Am I supposed to look at these stories as a high moment about, like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And therefore, what I want to do is present to you a third possibility, which I think really teaches us so much more about these stories by looking at the stories in a very, very different way. I was in a class, an education class, and I learned about a theory by someone by the name of Dr. Kurt Lewin. He lived in the 1950s, but it's still a fascinating theory. And he asks the following question, which I thought was a very interesting question. How do people change in a permanent way? I mean, we always want to change. We always, every Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we promise all these things, right? And it doesn't always happen. And sometimes it lasts a week and sometimes it lasts a few months, but it doesn't normally last. And that's normally true. When people try to change, they end up going back to the way they were before. So we asked the question, how do people change in a successful way? And his answer is there are 3 steps to successful change. And if you don't have all 3 steps, then the change is not going to actually be permanent. And the way he calls these stages, which I really like the way he calls it 3 steps: the unfreeze step, the change step, and the refreeze step. Let me explain what they mean. Unfreeze means that before you actually change, you have to have what we would call a shikul hanefesh. You have to really think really hard about your life, about what you want from your life, how the way your life is right now is not working. You have to break it all down. You have to really have that moment of breaking and a rethinking of how am I going to make this change? How am I going to change my life? Only after you really have that moment, that unfreeze moment, can you then change. And then after you make that change, can you have a refreeze where the change becomes permanent? When I saw this theory, I actually was thinking about the 3 stages of the Rambam in terms of tshuva, which lines up beautifully. First, we have vidoy, which is really the unfreeze. I admit I made a mistake. I'm thinking about my mistake. I'm processing that mistake. Then, of course, there's charata. I feel bad, but I make the change. I change my life. And then there's azivas achet. The next time it comes, I don't do it again. That's the refreeze. I now am a different person. So let's now take this theory and apply it to our situation, where again, his idea is if I don't have an unfreeze moment, change can't be permanent. So I would like to claim is these 3 stories are not moments of low. They're not moments where they're screaming at somebody. They're actually their unfreeze moment where they're screaming at themselves. They're screaming out, I need to change. This is not going the way I want it to go. I need to change. And this is the moment of the story where after this, they change. And then things start to go in a very different direction. And I want to play it out for you. If I look at it as a moment of strength, of screaming at themselves, I need to change, the story changes for us into a very positive story. Let's take each one very quickly. If you look at Sarah, I think very clearly, if we call this story where she screams at Avram, but she's not screaming at Avram, she's screaming at herself, this doesn't work. What is she saying? She's saying as follows, this whole idea of marrying Hagar, have a child with Hagar, that was my idea. And all of a sudden, when Hagar changed the way it was going and said, I can't have the kid, what did I realize? This isn't the way. This isn't the way that I am meant to be part of Am Yisrael. I'm not going to be adopting Ishmael. This isn't the way it is meant to be. So what does Sarah then do? She tries to put it back to the way it was before, make Hagar back into her maid again, but it doesn't work. Hagar doesn't want to be the maid again, so Hagar runs away. But what's interesting is that when Hagar comes back, Sarah has changed. Her mindset has changed. I'm not going to be part of Am Yisrael through Hagar. That's not how it's going to work. And how do I know that? Because when the child is born, if you look at the source 39 with me, there's no trying to take Yishmael to be her child. This child, Asher Yalda Hagar Yishmael, it's the child of Hagar. And again, Beledet Hagar, it's the child of Hagar. She does not get involved. We don't see her getting involved with Ishmael. For all 13 years that Abraham is raising Ishmael, Sarah is out of the picture. For 13 years, you have to understand the strength of Sarah to stay and watch as Hagar and Abraham are raising this child together, believing somehow that she's going to be part of this, but has no idea how. 13 years later, finally, God reveals to Abraham, Sarah ishtacha lo tikra shema Sarah, change her name from Sarai to Sarah because she will be blessed. She will have a child. It's kind of like the epiphany occurs, but she didn't hear it. But then the three malachim come, this past week's parsha, and she finally finds out. But understand, all that time in between, we don't see any of her trying to fight with Hagar, take Ishmael. There's a change in Sarah. She's waiting. She's waiting patiently until there's another way for her to be part. Once she comes to that realization, Hagar is not her way into Am Yisrael, things change for her. It takes a while, but things change for her. What I wanted to show you, though, with Sarah, you see it so interestingly in the structure of Sarah's story. I gave you here the chiastic structure that I think is the story of Sarah. There are two stories that I'm sure you realize as we read through the psukim that are so parallel. There's the story of Sarah being taken by Paro, right? And then there's miracles and she gets returned. And then in Parak Chaf, there's the story of her taken by Avimelech. And then there are miracles and she returns. But if you think about it, those stories happen. They're very similar, but they happen in very vital points of her life. One is if you take the story right afterwards, or I really should say right after Avram is chosen, before Hagar's in the picture. The other one happens after there's this realization that Hagar is not part of her life. If you look at my structure for a minute, and I'll play it out for you. If you look at the stories, the way chiastic structures work is that there's A, B, C, and then the B parallels B1 and A2 parallels A2. So if you look at the A's with me, we have the beginning of Sarah's story. Avram is chosen. They assume Sarah is chosen. And then, of course, at the end, to parallel it, there is a chosen son to both Avram and Sarah. Then we have the B's, which is we have taken by Paro and taken by Avimelech. And the story in between is the story of Hagar. And the way that therefore is playing out for us is Sarah made a mistake by telling Avram to marry Hagar and have Yishmael through Hagar. And therefore what she does is when she realizes the mistake is she changes her mindset. I no longer am going to care about Hagar. I'm no longer going to care about Ishmael. And then it's like she goes back in time. She rehas the story of Paro, but now through Avimelech. And then of course she gets to be chosen. Now this story of taken by Paro, taken by Avimelech, we have to recognize is stories of tremendous faith of Sarah. Right? Sarah is taken. She could say, by the way, he's my husband. Kill him and she would be free. She could have a new life. She's married to a king. She could have a great life. And she doesn't. She doesn't. It's a tremendous story. And Hashem does miracles not to save Avram. Avram is fine. He's the brother, right? She is the one who's saved by the. So here we have this story that comes up twice to kind of show this chiastic structure of Sarah. She believes that she's part of the mission. She's taken by Paro. She proves herself. She then kind of loses it in the Hagar story, regains herself by saying, okay, that's not the way. She then again has an Avimelech type of an experience. And then, of course, Sarah is chosen. She has that chosen child. Once she has that realization, then she gets the refreeze, right? She has the story right afterwards. Hashem pakadet Sarah. She has the chosen child. And what does she do? She fixes her mistake. Garasha ta'ama hazot. She kicks out Hagar. She knows that that was a mistake. And now she has to fix it. Once she has the child, she kicks Hagar out of the house. And of course, Avram gets a little bit upset. And Hashem says, absolutely. Sarah is the chosen one. Yitzchak is the chosen one. Kick them out. So what you see here in this story is that moment where she's like, uh-oh, I did this wrong. I thought it wrong. Unfreeze. I scream out. Then I make a change. And then there's a refreeze where everything goes back to the way it was supposed to be. If you look at the story of Rachael, you actually see it too. Because in the story of Rachael, you can actually see it as when she finally marries Jakob, she's so excited to be married to Jakob. And as Leah is having child 1, child 2, child 3, she doesn't say a word. She doesn't complain. She's the beloved wife and she likes her role of the beloved wife. And all of a sudden she realizes only after child number 4, this is not who I want to be. I don't just want to be the wife. I want to be a mom too. I want to be part of Am Yisrael. And she screams, Havali Banim, wait, this role that I have is not enough. I also want to be part. I also want to have children. And therefore, what does she do next? Once she has that epiphany that that's the role she wants to play, she does change. In the next psukim, what does she do? She shares Jakob. She gives Jakob her maid to have a baby through her maid. That's something that you would never do, right? You don't want to share your husband with somebody else. But she realizes she doesn't just want to be the wife. She wants to be a mom too. And therefore, she shares her maid. And in those stories, when she has those first two children, look at the names. She's happy with having a child through her maid. Danani Elokim v'gam shama b'koli. Ben, God has heard my voice. He's judged me and he's given me a kid. I'm so excited. Naftali, I've succeeded. Yes, I did it. I'm good now. And all of a sudden you see a change in Rachael. There's a change in her. I'm happy being the mom. I want to be part of this people, but I'm happy being a mom through my maid because that's the only way I think that I'm going to be able to have a child. And once she comes to that realization, you have to understand, Leah at this point has child after child, Yisachar, Zevulun, and then her maid, right, has children also, and she has Dinah. There's 5 more kids born to Leah. You don't see any more psukim where Rachael gets upset, where Rachael is jealous, nothing. Rachael has changed. Rachael is happy with her new status. She's the beloved wife, but she's also now the mother. She has shared Bilhah as well, and now she has a refreeze where God gives her children. Vayiskor Elokim et Rachel. You see that moment where she makes that change. She yells out, changes her ways, gives over Bilhah to have her own children. And then, of course, the refreeze where Hashem recognizes she's a new person. She's no longer jealous of her sister, and therefore she gets to have children of her own. In the story of Leah, you see this as well. Because I think Leah sees herself as this woman who's doomed to be hated by her husband, and all her goal in life is to just have children, which is not something that she's very happy with. And then for the day that she yells at Rachael and she says, how dare you take my husband? What I think Rachael is saying to her is, you want me to share? Just take him. Go after him. Approach him. Stop being the victim. Stop saying, oh, I don't have my husband. He doesn't love me. Do something about it. That's what Rachael is saying. She's not saying, I give you permission to take Jakob. Do something. Because what does Leah do in the next pasuk? Come, Jakob. She initiates. She says, come on, Jakob. I'm also your wife. You also should be with me. And what does Jakob do? He's with her. And what does she then have? More children, right? Leah had to stand up for herself. And that's what Rachael is saying. Leah screams out, I don't like this role that I'm playing. I'm the hated wife. And Rachael says, well, why do you have to be? Stand up for yourself. So Leah does. And as soon as Leah does that, everything changes for her. She has more children. She clearly is much happier once she has this children and this new role. If you look at the names of these children, Natan Elokim Schari, Yisachar, Hashem has given me my reward. How beautiful. Zevulun, Zavdani Elokimoti, Zebet Tov, God has given me a present. These are beautiful, beautiful psukim that she's saying about her children. You see the growth in Leah. She's changed. She's changed seeing my husband is with me because clearly she's having more kids. So Jakob is now with her much, much more. You see a change in Leah as well, a change that occurs after she screams, after she unfreezes. And then, of course, we see it. I just want to show it to you in this parallel, in source 42, compare the language of what she was before the unfreeze and after the unfreeze. If you look at the language of her naming Levi, it's very similar to her naming Zvulun, but it's totally different. Maybe my husband will come to me because I have 3 sons. If you look at Chizkuni that I gave you here, he'll have to come to me. I hope he'll come to me. It's kind of like she's waiting for him to pay attention to her. Versus Zvulun, God has given me a present. This time he's Belenio. He's with me. He's with me now. I got 6 sons. Like, it's all good now, right? Everything is good. You see a change in Leah. You see a change in her tone. And of course, after that, this refreeze in Leah as well. That's when, of course, she has all these other children and we see her attitude change. When it comes to all 3 of them, we really do see this 3 steps. And I think that's a new way to look at these stories. They have that unfreeze moment. They scream, they yell. And I don't think they're yelling at the person. They're yelling at themselves. They're saying, this is not good. My life is not the way I want my life to be. Then they go through a change. They change their mentality. They change the way they act. They change to make their life better. And once they do that, when they refreeze in this new life that they have, source 43, That's when things go well. Hashem pakad et Sarah, Hashem remembers Sarah. Vayiskor Elokim et Rachel, Hashem remembers Rachael. Vayishma Elokim Leah, Hashem listens to Leah. There's beautiful symmetry within the psukim of what happens in that final step. Once they make that change, then God comes and hears them and remembers them. And I think if I take a step back, I really do think, yes, there are multiple ways to look at this story. There is a humanity to the story. They break, they hurt, just like we hurt. Sometimes we break. And maybe they lashed out and they did something negative. Sometimes we do that too. We lash out at somebody when we're really, really hurting. And at the end, we have to go and we have to say, I'm sorry to that person, because at the end, we end up not doing the thing that's right. Maybe that's the lesson from the story too. Or maybe we can look at it that when you're in that low moment, it's the time to, yes, you break, but the break should be the moment of growth. The break should be the realization that I have the power to change my situation and to make it better. And maybe it's to yell at someone to ask them to help you. Yeah, sometimes relying on others is what we need to do. But sometimes it's about ourselves and turning to ourselves and changing something within us to make our lives better. And I think that is such a powerful message to learn from our Imahot. We see their humanity, we see possibly a flaw in them, or we see a strength in them. And we can learn from them that when we hit that low moment, how to take that moment and to grow and to change, just like I think is being represented in these three stories of Sarah, Rachael, and Leah. I thank you all very, very much for joining me today in this year. I'm going to stop share. And if anybody wants to ask any questions or comments, but it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I'm going to give you a chance to ask questions, everyone, but I also just want to mention randomly, you'll see two other emails in the chat, which is one for Dara and one for myself. We're really, we like doing Zoom because so many of you have asked us for it, but we also want to get your feedback on doing these in person going forward, and maybe not for the winter months, but maybe for the spring. So just please send either Dara or myself an email and just let us know how you feel about continuing on Zoom or going in person, or maybe doing, we've talked about a combination, but it may not work. We've been told it doesn't work as well so much because you get, Nechama's even told us that sometimes you get, 30 people on Zoom and 2 people in the room. So we really don't want to do that, but please give us your feedback. And I'm going to stop talking now so anyone can ask questions. Thank you so much, Nechama.
Thank you, Cheryl. Any questions? Everyone's good?
I found it to be very dynamic. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All righty. No one has any questions, and it has been a pleasure.
Wonderful.
And thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you
everybody.
so much, Nechama. Thank you. Amazing.
My pleasure. Anytime. Have a
Thank
wonderful evening,
you.
everybody.
You
Thank
too.
you. It was
Thank you
wonderful.
so much.
Thank you.